Right. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce a special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, he's got his own website, kingofkingsport.com. And our special guest now joining us here, impromptu edition of Book Corner. He's got a new book out called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport, Tennessee, 1960 through 1969. Beau James, welcome in, man. A longtime admirer of your stuff and of your work. Welcome in. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Man, I really appreciate you. I've got to say that. And what is it about old school wrestling and you being a historian of such that calls your name, Beau?
Well, I grew up super fan. Anybody that knew me as a kid knew I was a super fan. You would see me ringside in Knoxville, Morristown, Johnson City, Kingsport, wherever Continental or Mid-Atlantic Wrestling was at the time. But also, my family has been involved in pro wrestling since 1964. So, it's kind of in the blood. And I got hooked on wrestling through my granny, who used to tell me stories when I was a kid about going to wrestling matches in a circus tent in Kingsport.
Wow.
And at that time, it just seemed so foreign to me, because when I was a kid, they were wrestling in the Dome in Kingsport, which is 5,000-seat air-conditioned arena. And I'm just trying to think, how did it grow from a tent on Main Street to this? And my dad and his brothers used to go to the matches, and my mom went to the matches, and I just grew up hearing the names of the Corsican brothers, the Fargos, the Whitey Caldwells, the Ron and Don Wrights, and et cetera. And the older I got, the more I wanted to know about them. And I just sat down one day and I said, look, this history's got to be told, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it's told correct.
And keep it alive. Beau, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I've been around these parts for 20-plus years doing sports radio. And in that time, as we visit with Beau James, and he's got a new book out, and it's exciting to visit with Beau today because his book is called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport, 1960 through 1969. Beau, in these parts when I first got here, I grew up on the old WWF product, and so that's how I experienced the kayfabe era. But I've got to tell you that coming here has really blown my mind from the standpoint of whenever I visit with people and they say to me, man, if you could have seen it back in the day, if you could have seen Ron Wright, or if you could have seen Whitey Caldwell when they did this or they did that, or watching the old Jim Hess television shows, of which very little footage has survived through time. And so we count on people like you to keep the stories alive, to keep these characters alive. And so in my mind, I say laudable work by you. I think you're one of the people whose voice must be heard.
Well, I appreciate that. A lot of people, when they tell you stuff about wrestling here, they remember it incorrectly themselves. Here in Kingsport, growing up, I always heard, Ron and Whitey wrestled each other every week. Well, that's not true. There was a period of time that Whitey Caldwell did not wrestle in Kingsport for over 2 years. There was a period of time he didn't wrestle anywhere for over a year because he had a broke shoulder. So his career, even though it spanned almost 15 years, there was 3 years that he was not in the ring locally. And when he did feud with Ron Wright, it was usually 3 to 6 weeks at a time. They break apart, and then they don't touch each other for a year. And then they bring it back because it would be hot. They would have that seed planted every week that they're going to do it again, but they would make you want to see it. In the 60s, 1 out of 4 people in the city of Knoxville was going to pro wrestling on Friday night.
That's incredible.
Yeah. In Kingsport, 1 out of 6 people went every Wednesday night. Now, there's a periods of time from like 3 to 4 years, there was no TV in East Tennessee, not in Tri-Cities or Knoxville, no TV wrestling. They were drawing those amount of people with word of mouth newspaper ads, window cards, and a little bit of radio. And when one out of four people in the city of Knoxville are going to wrestling, it's on every street corner. Everybody's talking about, did you see what happened last Friday night? Did you hear what happened last Friday? We got to go this Friday. Same thing here in Kingsport. Same thing in Johnson City, which ran on Tuesday nights. And a lot of people are confused. They like to talk about the Knoxville territory. Knoxville was not a territory. It did not become a territory until January of 75 when it combined with Kingsport. Knoxville was one city. They ran on Friday night, promoted by George and John Kazana from 1933 to 1974.
Incredible.
They ran a spot town on Saturday night. They did not employ full-time wrestlers. Their talent came from Kingsport, Charlotte, or Nashville. Kingsport was the full-time territory in East Tennessee that ran 5 days a week and employed full-time wrestlers.
That's and that's the type of history that you're going to get, that you've put together here. But there's a relationship, obviously, between Kingsport and Knoxville. What other cities would these guys have served out of Kingsport? What was part of their loop back then?
The Kingsport loop was, they were off Sunday, Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday night was Johnson City. Mm-hmm. Wednesday night was Kingsport. Thursday night was Bristol. That's a perfect 20-mile square in every direction. Friday night, Caldwell and the Wrights would go to Knoxville, work for John Kazana, and then the Kingsport crew would either be like in somewhere like Middlesboro, Kentucky, or Greenville, Tennessee, Harlan or Hazard, Kentucky, or Southwest Virginia. And then Kazana, they would also run a Saturday night spot show up here on this end. Kazana would do Friday night, Chihowee Park. When he had TV, they did TV Saturday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And then he would either run like Lenoir City, Clinton, Morristown, somewhere in that area on Saturday nights. If you go right up 81, up 40 to 81, that's the split. Kazana owned Morristown to Knoxville. Kingsport owned Greenville to Marion, Virginia. Newport, Tennessee, was ran by both the Kingsport office and the Kazanas. It was just like, you take it this month and I'll run it next month. And Middlesboro, Kentucky was ran the same way. They both ran it, but in conjunction together.
Beau James joining. His website, kingofkingsport.com. You will see there, don't miss this, the history of pro wrestling in Kingsport, Tennessee, 1960 through 1969. Now, Beau, let me ask you, when you're putting this type of work together and you say memories of people are faulty, memories are faulty. I know that from visiting with people in the past, telling you sports stories, and you go back and watch videotapes, and what people remember isn't necessarily the way it was. You talk to detectives, they'll tell you that. Yeah. That's why a lot of times eyewitness account can be faulty. And if you take 25, 30 years, 40 years down the road, you get further and further away from the truth. But let me ask you, how did you develop? How did you go about doing the research for this?
Hundreds and hundreds of hours in the library. And then taking the information in the newspaper ads that ran every week promoting the cards. So that way I had it all in front of me when I sit down to talk to Don Wright. If his memory was a little off, I said, well, let's just look. Yeah. And I'd have it right there. But Donnie's mind, very good. Ron Wright's mind was very good at remembering stuff. Mm-hmm. Whitey Caldwell's widow, Nancy, kept a tremendous amount of records and knew about where he was at and what was going on. Mm-hmm. He had pictures there's going to be pictures in this book that you've never seen. No one has ever seen outside of the Caldwell family. Mm. There's pictures in this book that Melvin Johnson gave me of Ron and Whitey chain matches that have never been seen. So there's lots of stuff in here in this book that this is the first time publicly it's getting out there. There's, lawsuits. I didn't just do the weekly wrestling cards. I put in the FYI where the riots happened, who was arrested, what they were charged with in court. Ron Wright being sued over hitting a fan in Kingsport. With one punch, he broke the guy's nose, knocked out 4 teeth, and broke his jaw. You know, people ask me all the time, was Ron really that tough? Well, that was one punch. There's also a story in the book where the riot of 67 in Greenville, he was cut from his neck to his hip bone, 300 and some stitches. Dozens of fans hitting him with chairs, punches, kicks, whatever they could pick up and throw at him. They never got him off his feet.
I'll tell you something about Ron Wright. The day that he passed away, okay, we were in the middle of our programming, doing whatever it was we did. Word came out, it filtered. I got a text from Wildman Jeff Anderson here locally, who's wrestled forever, and who loves old school wrestling and got to know Ron, and you know, it was heartbreaking news to him as news filtered through the wrestling community, and we were one of the first to report it. We ended up talking about it in an impromptu sense and just taking listeners' reactions to it, okay? And we had the mayor of Knox County, Tim Burchett, call the program. He put down the rest of his hour that afternoon and sat there with us on the phone and was talking about the impact that this man had had on this place in the 70s, in the late 60s. Ron Wright, to this day, is a name. When people say that name, eyes light up. I mean, people appreciate the showman that this guy was.
And the thing, too, you know, I did a special TV show that aired up here in the Tri-Cities on Ron, where I took my archives of footage and pictures and posters, and we put together a 30-minute program. People don't realize the city of Kingsport's Parks and Rec was funded by pro wrestling until 65. So every ballpark, every corner neighborhood playground, which there's still several of them left in Kingsport, that was built before 65, wrestling paid for it.
Incredible.
Ron Wright, when he took over the promotion here in 67, he continued to raise money for the Boy Scouts, for schools, for the Children's Hospital up here. It's untold of how much money that man raised for this community. Never taking credit for not one bit of it, because he was the bad guy wrestler. And he didn't want people to know he was the man behind it. He helped people all of his life up here in East Tennessee, whether it's from, you know, Crossville to Kingsport, Bristol. No matter where he was at, he helped people through wrestling. And, you know, wrestling at that time, the Vols were not on TV every week. You only got one baseball game a week on NBC, the game of the week. Remember that Saturday afternoon?
Absolutely.
The only other sport you saw was the Wild World of Sport on ABC.
Yep.
The NASCAR in Bristol, it had not become Bristol, baby, yet. These were our heroes. These were our homegrown heroes. There is no other territory in wrestling history like East Tennessee's 2 territories here. There is no other time and place in wrestling's history where the main attraction, evil against good, was 2 homegrown local boys that grew up 9 blocks away from each other, knew each other their entire lives, and went on to live their dreams and sell out arenas and set attendance records that will never be broken in their hometown and all the cities within 150 miles of their hometown.
Now, for those just joining, Beau James is joining. Beau's got a book out, and I want to encourage you to check out his website, kingofkingsport.com. The book is called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport, Tennessee, 60 through 69, but it also deals, obviously, a lot with Knoxville, because these guys are interchangeable in terms of the guys that you know and the people that we're talking about and the characters and the history thereof. And there's some Knoxville stuff in his book as well, because the two are intertwined, as he says. But the truth is that much of this emanated because the territory itself was operated out of Kingsport, and Kazana used these guys, as you heard him say before. So we're talking about interchangeable parts here. But Beau, the passion, the love, the appreciation that people feel all these decades later, it resonates. And that day on the air, I mean, I'm telling you, in all my days of doing what I do, there have been few days that have been elicited the impromptu emotion. The day that Dale Earnhardt, the day after he perished, we did a program. There was that type of emotion. The day that Ron Wright died was on par with that. I'm telling you, people would not believe that. People around the country would not believe that. I wouldn't have believed it coming from Pennsylvania, and I thought the love of Bruno Sammartino and the stuff that I grew up watching was great. It's nothing like the connection that people here have for the wrestling hero of the past. I mean, you cannot verbalize it. Can you do me a favor and stay right there? Because when we come back, I want to unpack this with you and maybe take a couple phone calls. Would you mind if we did that?
No, I'm sure. I'll stay right here with you as long as you want me to.
All right. My man Beau James is joining. King of Kingsport is his website. The book is called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport, 60 through 69. We're featuring it today on our Book Corners features. Beau James, he's the King of Kingsport, kingofkingsport.com. He's joining us today, talking some old school wrestling. If you want to get in, 865-200-5402. Beau, my producer, and thanks for coming back for another segment. We'll get some phone calls in here in a second. My producer, Brian Hartman, was asking, can you go through those numbers again on any, when there were cards here on a Friday night? What was the population of Knoxville percentage that was at a wrestling match?
25% of the city was there. They average about 4,300 people every Friday night. And the population of the city, now this is not county and metro, this is the city, not Maryville, not Clinton, not et cetera, was about 43,000 people. So 1 out of 4 people in the city was at wrestling on Friday night.
What would you say was the penetration of these guys? We have terms like Q rating, things like that. Like your name is known by. If I would have said Ron Wright's name to somebody in Knoxville or Knox County back then or the surrounding areas, what percentage would you say would have known who Ron Wright was?
100%. 100%, because, if you got 1 out of 4 going.
Right.
Now you got to think about, there's not many air-conditioned homes in the early 60s.
That's a great point.
So they're going to sit outside on the porch and they're going to talk to their neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what'd you do last night? Well, I went and seen Ron Wright and Whitey Caldwell. And then it's just going to trickle on down through there. Word of mouth. No television. No television for a 4-year period. Only the newspaper ads, window cards, and a little bit of radio.
Why not television? Why couldn't they make it work on television?
Well, they had TV early on, where they would tape, where they would show it live from the theater downtown, and then it just didn't translate once they moved to Chihowee Park. The lighting, I guess, with just that one light over the ring out there at the amphitheater.
Sure is, yep.
And they didn't have a studio in Knoxville big enough until Channel 26 came along in '69 and built a studio for wrestling.
Yep.
That's what it was built for.
And Beau, I've run into so many people here, advertisers and such, who have told me as a kid, I used to go up there on Saturday mornings and watch the show. And it was impactful. It's impactful to people to this day.
Well, they, like I said in the first segment, they were our sports heroes. They were live. They were real. We could reach out and touch them Wednesday in Kingsport or Friday in Knoxville. If they left the ring, you could yell at them. You could slap them on the back. You could get a high five. You could take a picture with them. We didn't have professional sports in the South until the Atlanta Braves came here. This was your professional sports hero.
It's incredible. Let's go to the phones. Beau James, our guest, kingofkingsport.com. The book is called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport, 60 through 69. But really, it rips through the history of this. Go ahead.
I give over a 100-year history lesson.
Thank you.
In East Tennessee, over 100 years. The Kingsport paper just turned 100 2 weeks ago. I have read every paper of 100 years, went through them through my database over the last 22 years.
I don't think you like your wrestling enough. We need to work on you a little bit. Let's get MP in here. MP, welcome in. Hello.
Hey, guys. Hello.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, Beau. You remember that this is probably 97 in Fall Branch when Ricky Morton turned heel by DDTing that female wrestler, Debbie Combs?
Yes.
Can you talk about that? Because that was a classic.
That is the all-time record gate and attendance for our little arena in Fall Branch. That was me against Debbie Combs, which it took us a year to build to that point, which was a remake of an early 70s program with Cora Combs, her mother, and Ron Wright. History repeating itself.
So you're telling me you were involved in that?
Yeah.
And this guy's remembering that?
Yeah.
And Ricky Morton got involved, and what happened?
See, here's the thing. I can tell you just about move for move every match I saw as a kid. When it gets to mine, they all run together. I remember Ricky came in, I think he DDT'd or helped me or something at the end. I would have to go back to the video. But yeah, that's brought up a lot here in my little hometown of Fall Branch outside of Kingsport.
And MP, you remember that, how and why?
Actually, I was not there, but I have a good friend that just sent me a text message and asked me to call in and talk about that because he said that was the best live event he'd ever been to. And this guy was a big ECW, Smoky Mountain Wrestling kind of groupie. He would follow around and go to a lot of events. So I quit watching wrestling probably in 91 and didn't start back till about 99 for a year or two. But I grew up when I was young in Florida. Do you know anything about championship wrestling from Florida in the early 80s?
Yeah, and the most famous match of Whitey Caldwell and Ron Wright was their brutal chain matches. Mm-hmm. And they came from Florida. Ron was booked in Florida and saw Boris Malenko and Eddie Graham in a chain match. And
that was some of the greatest stuff ever, because I was like 8 or 9, and Kevin Sullivan had that Satan angle with the purple haze, and it was literally scary. And then my father would take me to these little gyms in rural Central Florida and watch these matches. I guess Barry Windham and Dusty Rhodes were the top faces at the time. And then later on, Lex Luger kind of got his start in Florida, and I'll never forget, I was at the Ocean Center, and it was him against Ric Flair. That was when the NWA had all these territories. Flair would travel around. He was out of the Mid-Atlantic, but he would travel around and defend the title. Luger was the U.S. champion, and it was 1 hour time limit, best 2 out of 3 falls, and they were split 1 fall apiece. Of course, they've gone, I guess, the full hour or however long, and Luger was on top of him, and they got to the 2 count, and then the bell rang, and of course all the sheep thought that Luger had won the title, so the place goes crazy, but the time limit had expired by 1 second, and I actually caught that at age 10. I knew that it had gone over, and he hadn't won. But you talk about some mad rednecks in Daytona Beach, Florida that night.
MP, thank you.
Eddie Graham that ran Championship Wrestling is highly considered the smartest man that was ever in professional wrestling when it came to how to present wrestling. And here's what most people do not know about Eddie Graham. He's an East Tennessee boy,
born
and raised in Chattanooga.
That's incredible.
Yep.
The passion of that region. You were talking about the passion of East Tennessee. You said you'd put the passion of East Tennessee and what wrestling meant in the time period you're covering against any other place in the United States of America. There's just a special, and I've always gotten that feeling, even to this day. You go to the Coliseum and see a show, and you walk in there, and you walk in some of these venues, and they say the same about some of the spots up in the neck of the woods where you are. You can feel the history in those buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a geek. I'm a geek like that. I try to, think, what was it like to be in these barns back then? Let me ask you, what was... If you were to take, based on people you've talked to, and you're a historian, Where are some other places in our country that could rival the passion that East Tennessee had for its professional wrestling?
Portland, Pacific Northwest, which
Wow.
I've wrestled out there too. Even though it's West Coast, the Pacific Northwest is like the Southeast. Small towns, hometown heroes. They were late getting sports teams. Nothing going on. They would run Portland on Tuesday and Saturday night and sell it out twice a week. It has, when you're out there in Portland and Seattle now, here in 2000s, you still get the same kind of reaction to like Dutch Savage and to like Buddy Rose and Roddy Piper that people give here for the Wrights and Caldwell and those guys. Here's another thing about Whitey Caldwell was killed in 1972. We're in 2016, and people still put flowers on his grave. Wrestling fans still go and put flowers on his grave. And I know that for a fact because he's buried in the same cemetery that my granddad is and a lot of my relatives. And I always go look at his grave, make sure it's cleaned off when I go over and check on theirs. And there's always flowers that somebody has come and put on his grave. That's how much that man meant. He has been gone for 4 decades. And he's still the first person to bring up in Kingsport.
It's incredible. I mean, people use his name to make. When I first got here, I was going, who is Whitey Caldwell? I mean, I just kept. I would have Jim Cornette on. Smoky Mountain was going and blowing. And I'm first on the air in the mid '90s. And Jim's a smart guy, and I know you know Jim. He wrote a forward in your book. And Jim was a guy. And Jim was a guy that used me because he said, "Well, this guy likes wrestling, and we'll go in and we'll do some bits, and we'll have some fun with him on the air." And Jim, he's got the book of jokes memorized, and he's just extremely witty. But people would call in and they would talk about Whitey Caldwell, Whitey Caldwell, Whitey Caldwell. Let me ask you this: when he was killed, and he died tragically in a car crash, how big a news was that here locally?
Well, it shut the city of Kingsport down. The stores did not open on the day of his funeral. The people lined the city streets when the funeral procession came out. It was heartbreaking. Before Whitey was the number one wrestling star in East Tennessee, he was the first 5-star or 5-letterman sports star at Dobyns-Bennett. Wrestling, football, baseball, track, and golf. I go to church with people that grew up with Whitey, 2 blocks away from his childhood home. The older men there tell me nobody could run as fast as Whitey. Nobody could out-wrestle, out-fight, out-hit a ball, out-throw a ball. He was the ultimate athlete. At his wife's funeral last year, the pastor said every man in the city of Kingsport wanted to be Whitey Caldwell. Even when he was in high school, grown men wanted to be that kid because, wait till you see these pictures in the book of he's so young. He's a movie star. He's just the perfect, handsome, young baby face for a mean, tough villain to be beaten on and the people to lose their mind, and he wasn't soft. East Tennessee wrestling was as tough as it came. You find any picture and you'll see blood. That blood was brought the hard way, and it was brought often.
When you say the hard way, you're speaking in code there. What's that mean for the listener just catching this and they're mesmerized by what you're saying right now? What's the hard way mean?
They would punch each other in the eye as hard as they could, just to draw blood above the eye.
No blades, in other words.
No. Ron Wright had what was called the chisel. And you will see pictures in the book of the chisel, and you will hear the entire story with stories from Kevin Sullivan, Ron Fuller, and other people who were hit by the chisel. And what the chisel was a piece of metal that went across his knuckles, and then coming out in the center, about 1/4 of an inch, was a triangle, diamond-shaped wedge. And he would grab you in a headlock and punch you right between the eyes with that chisel. And blood would shoot 10, 15 feet. The people knew he just split his head wide open. And if you meet somebody, these old-time wrestlers, I go to all the conventions now.
Yeah.
And I see these guys, and they all have this distinct scar. Les Thatcher has it. Everybody knows Les. Look at Les's head. And you can just walk up and go, when did you work East Tennessee territories? You know that by the scars that Ron and Don left on people's heads. Don Wright told me when we're working on the 70s book now, and I spent some time with Donnie a few months ago, and he said the greatest line. He said, "Do you know why we only had the chain matches once a year? Because that's all you could have with them. Whitey would have killed you if you had them more than that." He said, Whitey used every link of the chain on every inch of your body. And he said you would do those every night for a week, and then they'd go away for a year. He said at the end of that week when you got up, you had imprints of the chain links from your ankles to the top of your head, where he had whipped you with that chain or beat you with it. And Whitey, in return, did not give anything that he was not going to take in return. This was a physical place. A lot of people came here to wrestle and could not handle it and left.
It mirrors the people of this place. You know, athletically speaking, this place, it likes stars. It loves its blue-collar guys.
Yeah.
It loves its people that give them a show, that they see effort from and hustle from. And one thing is a hallmark of wrestling of that era, which is when you paid your money, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody who would tell you from that era, I saw a stinker card over at Chilhowie Park. I saw a stinker card down in Lenoir City, or up in Kingsport, or up in Freedom Hall in Johnson City. Those guys put on a show, and people all these years later appreciate it.
The biggest names of the era were here, from Lou Fez to the Fargos. I mean, these were national names off of the DuPont network.
That
Pat
came
O'Connor's.
here. That came right here. Let's talk about that. Here. Yeah, let's talk about, when we continue, stay right there if you can. Beau James is joining. His book that's out right now, and he's working on another one on the 70s. It's called Don't Miss This, The History of Pro Wrestling in Kingsport. He's a great follow on Twitter, too, because he's constantly putting up photographs from that era and different facts and things like that, and things that he finds in his research. And I say that this work is very needed because we need to preserve that era while several of the folks are still here to preserve that era for us. And I unapologetically have him on this show today. Unapologetically, because you're damn right it's sports. You're damn straight it's sports. As we continue with more after this. Back with you. Bow your head when you say the name Beau James. The King of Kingsport is with us. KingofKingsport.com. Don't miss this. History of Pro Wrestling. Kingsport, Tennessee. 60 through 69 is out. Working on a book in the 70s you heard Beau talk about before. Beau, appreciate you staying there. Let's go back to the phones and grab GQF, who's up next with us. GQF, you're on with Beau James. Hello.
Hey, Beau, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
I'll tell you what, man, it brings tears to my eyes listening to this because, and I mean that heartfeltly. I remember when Whitey Caldwell got killed, and I remember when we only had one college football game on a week, one Major League Baseball game on a week, and I didn't care what was on TV. At 6:30 on Saturday night, when they replayed that Saturday morning recording, I dropped everything I was doing. Hey, but let me tell you a story I'll never forget. I was down at, my grandmother took me. My mother got killed when I was 8 years old. And she took us down to Chilhowie Park one night. And Don Wright was fighting Lou Thez. And this was when Lou was over the hill. But I'll never forget, I was standing right by Ron. Ron standing over in street clothes. And Don was getting his butt whooped by Lou. And I'll never forget, there was an old redneck. Well, he wasn't an old redneck. He was kind of a young redneck. He said, Ron, you better get up there and help little brother. Ron said, oh, I can't do that. And just a few minutes later, Ron jumps up there in the ring and takes a bootlace, and they tied Lou Thesz's leg to the turnbuckle and stomped on his leg for about 5 or 10 minutes. It was the most classic thing. I'll never forget that as long as I live.
No, that's the memories that, just like that I come across every day somewhere. Somebody in East Tennessee, when I'm out in town, wants to talk about wrestling, and everybody has that moment of their childhood when they remember when they discovered the Wright brothers or Whitey Caldwell or Frank Morrell or Ed Wolf or, countless other men that come through here. For my time period growing up, it was the Fuller brothers and Jimmy Golden.
Yep.
And we remember those. I can remember almost every card that I ever attended as a fan as a child. I can remember the emotions. See, they were emotionally invested. Here's how wrestling works now. It's national TV. They come to town with all the bells, the whistles, the dog and pony show. It's Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, and then they're gone. And you don't see them again for 8 months to a year, to where 52 weeks a year, Kingsport, Johnson City, Bristol, Knoxville saw wrestling. 12 times a year, Morristown, Greenville, Newport, Middlesboro, Kentucky, Harlan, Kentucky, Hazard, Kentucky saw wrestling. You had to be emotionally invested in the people on the television to continuously go there and pay your money week after week after week. Now, in the book, there is a letter that was wrote from the Dupree brothers to Jack Pfeffer when they were finishing up Kingsport and they wanted to get booked in Detroit. And they say in there, this is what our weekly guarantee is in Kingsport, $200. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money right now. But if you do the inflation calculator, it's $1,505 in today's money a week. The furthest trip that they had to make was Marion, Virginia, 70 miles. They were making in a day wrestling in East Tennessee what people working in factories were making in a week. There was money being made here. That's why people, they want to say, well, Ron Wright, Don Wright, Whitey Caldwell, they never drew money anywhere else. Why did they have to? Why would they have to leave home when they're making a great living and they're sleeping in their own bed every night?
How were they seen? How were they seen by their peers? How was the thing I've always wondered about a Ron Wright, is how he would have played in the Northeast if really given the opportunity.
They went up there. They were never going to be given the opportunity.
No, that's right.
Just because. Talking about Lou Thesz, go back to that caller. Lou Thesz was a traditional wrestler. He was what we called a hooker and a shooter. He could really wrestle and he could hurt you. Danny Hodge, the same way. They both could beat any man alive at any moment in time. They respected Ron and Don Wright. Ron wrestled Lou Thesz 17 or 18 different times, and they drew money. I asked Danny Hodge, I said a few years ago in Mobile at our wrestling reunion, I said, pound for pound, who is the toughest wrestler you ever saw? And he went through a few names. I said, pound for pound in a fight, who's the toughest you've ever seen? And Danny Hodge pointed right at Don Wright, and he said, that crazy hillbilly right there and his brother. He said they feared no man, and you could not beat them in a fight. Now, that speaks volumes. So that they had the respect of the peers for that. A lot of people were jealous of them, envious of them, because they had to go and move around every 6 months to a year where they stayed right here at home. And Jerry Lawler got the same thing on the Memphis end. The Tennessee is the only place that the stars were locals. Everywhere else, when you started, you had to leave because they weren't going to use local talent, because if the local talent got over, they may run opposition. They may say, well, he's making all the money, we're the stars drawing the houses, and they would open up their own promotion. So that's why they didn't do that. But from day one, Ron and Whitey were figured in by Mickey Barnes in Kingsport. They were figured in as the future of his promotion. When he took them to Knoxville and introduced them to John and George Kazana, they fell in love with him. John Kazana would have not sold the territory to the Fullers in 74 if Whitey was still alive. I wholeheartedly believe that from everything I've been told. He was in such mourning because he loved Whitey so much. Not just as a wrestler and as an employee, but as a human being. He was still in mourning when he died. Don Wright and Ron Wright never got to mourn the death of Whitey Caldwell.
They had to go right back and stay on the treadmill, right? Basically,
they had to keep it running. They had people that by the time that Whitey had died, they owned Kingsport. Whitey had a few points. Donnie had points. Ron Wright was the majority owner, and then a few other people had small percentages of it.
Do me a favor. Can I get you to stay there, Beau? Stay right there. Because we got to keep this going here. We're heading to an overtime segment. I want to thank Beau James for joining. To our radio listener, we're going to go away. We're going to go app only. I want to unpack some stuff with him. In the meantime, Dave Hooker's up next on the radio. We're staying app only. We love you.